Thank you, everybody. Thank you for having me. So yes, I'm not a researcher. I am the PPI person, the patient and public involvement person. And I work on PPI for the Oxford Labour Monitoring Project, or I did, along with Charlotte Bevan, my colleague. So Charlotte and I both come from user representative backgrounds and have moved into being PPI consultants over time, been involved in lots of different research projects. And basically we say, we're coming at this from very different perspectives. So I had 3 mainly straightforward births. Those are the boys at a wedding looking about in the background there. I taught antenatal classes for 20 years for the National Childbirth Trust, which is a UK charity which supports parents with all sorts of information, but it tends to be associated with normal birth rather than more sort of clinical births. But even though that's not the case, but it still is. And I was a parent rep on the infant randomised controlled trial looking at decision support software. And I've been involved with things like my local Maternity Voices Partnership, which is a co-production group where bringing together parents and health professionals to talk about how you can improve maternity services, and also the National Maternity Voices, which is the organisation behind that. Charlotte, on the other hand, has had 2 babies, but her first daughter died shortly after birth due to lack of recognition of a CTG, mismanagement of her labour. And I know even though her daughter Phoebe is now well into her 20s, I know that the family still carry that burden very much, that's a big thing that impacts upon them. And so Charlotte she left her previous career, she ended up going to work for SANDS, which is the Stillbirth and Neonatal Death Charity in the UK, and she's been involved with various things. And we came together, first of all, we were both invited to join the Policy Research Unit in Maternal and Neonatal Health and Care, which is run by the National Perinatal Epidemiology Unit, which is here at Oxford. So we've been working on that since I think 2018, and since then we've got involved with more and more things jointly. Because as I say, I don't know how much of you know about the maternity landscape in the UK, but user organisations are very active and very vocal. They are a big part of the story and the questions that are asked, that some are very general, but some are very specialised, and trying to make sure you have that range of perspective on a topic is really, really important. So when we started working with Antonia on the Oxford Labour Monitoring PPI, we already knew that the debate around this, I wouldn't quite go as far as toxic, but it's very polarised, I think it's fair to say. There are people there campaigning for a lot more monitoring, for more observation, for better monitoring, all the rest of it. And there are also parents really unhappy about the amount of monitoring that's imposed upon women during labour, saying it's not appropriate, there's no evidence for it, why are we doing it, why are we making things harder for women, and promising things that actually more often than not aren't delivered with that amount of technology. So we really wanted to put that range of perspectives at the heart of what we did, and we thought that it was important that we were the PPI leads. I mean, we were employed at that point already, so it was an easy hit. An easy win was that one, but we thought it was important that it was us and not just someone who's coming into doing patient and public involvement from a more general background. We felt we really understood that landscape very well and where people were coming from. We set up a panel representing those diverse views and experiences, and because we knew that the debate could get quite heated, we made a point of including representatives of organisations rather than just individuals who'd had difficult labour for one reason or another. We wanted to make sure that we got people who could give us a bit more of a strategic input. We wanted to do a bit more public engagement, so Antonia already did things like the IF Festival, and we wanted to expand on that a little bit, and we wanted to develop more public-facing communications that a lay audience looking for answers could come across and find quite easily. So, I'd say and these are some of the different people we included. Did make an effort. I did think it was important to include doulas. Does everybody come across doulas? Doulas, non-clinical birth supporters for women. Because I think, we tend to ignore them in research and maternity stuff, but they see so much, and they see it from, there's the woman labouring away, and there's the midwife watching her, but there's the doula in the middle watching the 2 of them interacting and seeing how they go. I think they've got a really interesting perspective. So we did manage to get one on board. And I say we had that range of input, and these are some of the different organisations that we worked with. Campaign Safe for Births was set up by Nikki Lyon, who she had a baby who I think died in infancy after a very difficult labour, and he was brain damaged. There's National Maternity Voices, the Birth Trauma Association, their CEO joined us at various points, as say SANS, a representative, NCT representatives, and Happy Moments, which is a local peer support organisation in my area, providing support for women through pregnancy and babyhood, childhood. It mainly supports South Asian mothers. Or mothers of South Asian descent, I should say. So we thought it was important to make sure we got that sort of like a more cultural perspective on these things as well, or at least to start gathering that more cultural perspective. And so I'm just going to take you through, we heard a lot over time, and some of it was quite challenging to listen to or think about what we're doing with next. But we drilled it down to three big things. And the first big one was this one. It's that parents, even the organisational representatives, really struggled to focus on the tool that we were talking about, which was the software that Antonio and the team were developing, the tool that they were developing to support women and clinicians in labour. Actually getting people to talk specifically about that tool was really, really hard. And I don't know if this is because it was the UK, and as I'm sure you're all aware, we've been having these ongoing maternity investigations and disagreements, but people kept talking and talking about the system. What's the point of having a fancy tool if the system doesn't support it? What's the point of having a fancy tool if people don't see things and react to them, if they don't escalate appropriately? What's the point? What's the point of having a tool if it's just stopping women doing what they need to be doing? And we did at one point, that doula we had on the PPI group, she did actually resign at one point. And she sent me a very polite email saying she was just seeing so many labours where CTG monitoring was stopping women moving in the way that they needed to. And she just said she couldn't support it anymore. Even though I did try and say, your perspective is important, we need to build it into this sort of thing, but she was like, no, I'm done, I've seen enough, I'm finished, I'm moving on. But yeah, and things like, how can it account for system capacity? Can we build this in somehow? People saying, can't you build this in somehow? So that, the CTG monitor is working, but if we get all these investigations and it's showing that it's not working, how are you putting into the stuff like not enough midwives, not enough consultant cover? They've had problems before here with bullying. Really some quite big asks, but saying, why can't the CTG be plugged into the system so that things like this can actually flag up that you've got a unit that's at risk of failing? It's just not giving that care. I realise that's a really big ask, but this is the sort of thing that parents were talking about. We did the solution we came up with to try and get them to talk about some of the peculiarities of the precise elements of that tool, that we did do some work where we got various researchers to talk about different bits of what they did. So we had the health economist come and talk about, the bit like a really brief 101 guide to this is how health economics work. We had another on deep learning, again, just trying to get people to dig into those elements so that they could talk about it in a slightly less emotional way than when we got into those discussions about, the usefulness or not of CTG monitoring. But any further ideas that you've got about this sort of thing, I would love to hear. Oh, have I gone the wrong way? Sorry, I do apologise. Oh, what have I done? Press the wrong button. Oh, there we are, it's fine. So yeah, that was a big point. And like, has everybody ever seen The Guardian and all the rest of the press yesterday? So the Motting report came out. It was horrifying, but at the same time, I have to say, none of it particularly surprising. Been hearing the same stuff for years, unfortunately. But everybody just goes, oh, our unit's not like that. Not really helpful. And this is the thing, so again, I think we've talked about this, women being regularly ignored. So they're ignored in lots of situations as well. It's not just when they're convinced that something's not right. It's also when they're saying, actually, I feel really confident that if you just let me get up and move around, me and my baby will be fine. And people just go, no, sorry, monitor first, not woman. So they're ignored both ways, back and forth, and their comfort is ignored. That is a really big thing. For me, yes, certainly. You're just like, well, you're expecting someone to go through this huge physical event, and when she says, I'm really uncomfortable, you go, yeah, but you just got to stay still because I just need to get the monitor on for a bit longer. Really? So, and we've got some questions for you, actually. So Sahana was starting to talk about this, which is brilliant. How do we capture women's voices alongside clinical indicators? Which again, the doula kept raising this a lot before she left, and I think it's a very good point. But at the same time, thinking about that UK population. So we had a lot of very eloquent, educated people on our panel, But we also know that there's quite a lot of women out there, especially over the last sort of 15, 20 years, who don't have very good English and have no idea about the NHS and how it works. Possibly use totally different words for things that happen to their bodies to the ones that the average UK-born midwife will recognise. I haven't given you the link here, but does anybody know where Barnsley is? Put your hand up if you know where Barnsley is. Anybody? Barnsley? Oh, well done, thank you. Barnsley, an area in South Yorkshire, a former minor district, very much occupied by white British people of a lower social group, quite a lot of deprivation and poverty. People are very, very local, shall we say, in Barnsley. And they use words that UK-born doctors don't recognise. There's actually a guide. There's a guide for doctors in Barnsley. If somebody says this, they mean that. It's very, very specific. So yeah, if it's like that just in the UK, for UK-born people, what's it like for all these other women and doctors who are using the NHS? How do we find that common language to capture what women are feeling? It's a really big challenge, I think, is this. And also, how do we make that a really clear, honest picture so that we're protecting both women and midwives? It's especially when things get to litigation and people are going, well, I said this. Well, no, I thought you said that. And, I taught antenatal classes for 20 years. I sat through session after session getting, verbal feedback from people going, oh, well, you didn't cover this. I'm thinking, pretty damn sure that I did, actually. But is it that, well, one, you weren't listening. Two, you couldn't understand because it was so far outside your way of understanding the world that you just couldn't take it on board. Or three, you just decided not to bother to come that week. It was always a possibility. So we know that those are things that happen when people are communicating around issues. So how do we make that safe for everybody, or at least accurate and agreed upon? And the other thing, we're still hearing, as I think you've just said, Deb, some women want more monitoring. Some women find listening to the monitor, seeing the monitor really reassuring, and others just find it unbelievably stressful. But the one thing they did agree on was, what could monitors do to increase personalisation of care? So, for that woman and that baby, what's right for them? Not what it says in the NICE guidance or anybody else's guidelines, but for this woman and this baby, right here, right now, what's the right thing? And I think that's a big point. That's the one point of agreement I can think of in UK maternity services right now. Consent. People are talking a lot about consent, about women, that it was just given to women, that they were told it's for the best, and they just didn't understand. And that people in a rush, staff are in a rush, staff are busy, but women are saying, well, yeah, but somebody saying, well, we haven't got time to take you through that form, isn't a legal parameter of consent. And again, in those antenatal classes, I used to spend ages saying to parents, you could absolutely just say to staff, have we just got a bit of time to talk about this? Can we just go through it? You don't have to challenge, because a lot of them just did not want to challenge at all. But I'm just like, if you understand what's going on, you'll cope with it better. And yet they'd come back and they'd say things like, well, I asked if we had time to talk about it, and the doctor just shouted no. Which, okay, it may have been an emergency, I don't know, I wasn't there. But that's another person just absolutely knocked back and thinking, I'm not going to ask any questions anymore. I'm not going to talk about stuff. So it's a big thing. It's this thing that women and families, because I think that's important, women and families want to feel seen and heard. And the question I've been asking for quite a few years now, nobody's given me an answer. Why is it so difficult to deliver both physiological care, assisting that woman to labour, and to accurately monitor a baby? Because it just seems that you have to have one or you have to have the other. Why is it so difficult? And I will fully hand up my hand and say, I've never been in a labour room apart from when I was in labour. So, I can't give you that outside view. But why is this so difficult? And the other thing I keep coming back to, because my degrees are in psychology and health psychology and so on, should we actually be assessing medical technology in terms of how it impacts on health promoting behaviours? So all the things that we know keep labour going, why, when technology is developed, why is it not assessed against that standard of, is it impacting the light levels in the room? How is it affecting that caregiver behaviour? How is it affecting women's ability to move? I remember talking to a midwife a few years ago about blood pressure monitors. And we're saying, we're talking about the new ones with the Velcro on that are much tighter and more accurate. And I was like, wow, that was really tight when I last had that blood pressure and everything. She said, yes, she says they're really great, much more accurate measures that I'm getting out of them. She said, I have noticed that blood pressure is generally higher with the new ones than it was with the old, the long bandage, and you had to spend ages wrapping it around the arm and tucking it in and holding the wrist and all the rest of it. She said, it's higher than when I did all that and I held a woman's hand. And then shortly afterwards, I took my son for a pre-op appointment when he was a child, and I did notice actually that the nurse, as she took his blood pressure, she stood with him and she just put her hand on his shoulder, and you just watch him go, oh, like that. So people can do it, but it's noticing and thinking, right, we've brought that in, it's changed this, how do I try and bring it back? How do I compensate for that? It's really, really important. So, yeah, we said importance to include a range of voices. This is from a recent paper that Charlotte was involved in, because we've had all these discussions, and it's about, you can't just amplify the bereaved voices, you also have to listen to the voices of people who either had a difficult birth because of your technology, but the baby's fine, because again, that's something I've been hearing for years. People saying to a woman who's really, really upset about her birth and maybe even physically damaged, oh, but you've got a healthy baby. Well, if she can't walk, or she can't sit down comfortably to feed her baby, or she can't manage to get her other children to school because she's so damaged, then that's a problem for her. It might not be a clinical problem because she's out of obstetric care, but it's a massive problem for her and her life. So yeah, how are we listening to these voices? And that we also have to think really carefully about how we listen to them respectfully and present them to one another. So Leeds Hospital Trust is also facing a maternity investigation. Leeds, a mum who'd had a baby there recently and had a really good birth experience, asked for her birth experience to be put on their social media feed, and accompanied by a comment saying, I just thought it's important to have a bit of positivity. And all the Leeds bereaved parents came out in force. They were not happy that story had been presented in that way, because they felt that their experiences were paramount. So it's a difficult thing to balance, and it's a thing that we have to think about how we're going to do it. Because, yeah, and I just wanted to finish in this. So I would direct you to Listen to Baby. Listen to Baby is actually about intermittent auscultation. It's a project that's been done here in Oxford by MPEU, looking at how they can improve intermittent monitoring. But during that process, they talked to women who'd had both intermittent and continuous fetal monitoring. And they took the qualitative paper and they put it into ChatGPT and asked it to write a poem. And it's been double checked that ChatGPT was accurate, and the PPI members, Mo and Samaya, have both had a bit of input as well on shaping that. But this is the last verse, and I was at the Listen to Baby launch a few weeks ago, and when I read this, when I saw it, I thought this is brilliant. And it's just this thing, because in labour, monitoring is never just data. And it is explanation or silence, touch or interruption, a clock I watch, or a hand that keeps me informed. And what I ask is not complicated. Tell me what you are doing. Tell me why, ask me, and then listen. To my baby, but also to me. And getting that balance is what we're really, really aiming for with this. So thank you, Charlotte and I. You can find us. I'm sorry, if you went to that link, then you'll see Antonia talking as well, which is wonderful. Thank you.
As compelling and heartrending as some of these stories are, I believe there's more to the iceberg than we're seeing. How many of the women that you've had experience with was there an apology for what happened?
I think often it's very rare. They talk about being bogged down in this long, drawn-out thing of going through different layers of complaint and trying to get a response and it not happening.
Vanishingly rare.
Yeah.
Number one. as in participating in malpractice cases, I asked the attorney to ask the defendant doctor who did the delivery, did you go see the baby in the nursery? Would you like to guess at some of the answers?
Yeah, I can, yeah.
It's not my responsibility. What can I do? Okay. And finally, these, I believe, are the problems. The problems are the emotional relationship with the physician and the mother in the first place, separate from the monitoring, separate from the care that's being given. Nicely done.
Thank you.
I have a question, maybe for Deb or for any of the three of you.
All right, okay.
It's more important your question. You please go.
I've been involved in a number of malpractice cases in which there's been a runaway verdict. A runaway verdict is arbitrarily anything over 20 million. The largest award I've ever been involved with is $144 million for a baby injured during labor. What can an expert say that's worth $144 million? And the answer is nothing. When you hear a verdict that gives that much award, it is the jury that is now angry at the doctor, at the defense, at the lying, at the dissembling. And that is that metaphor that's carried into the courtroom. And instead of getting up and saying, I wish I had the day to do over again, we fight to be right.
When I was a student, and so I was a mature student as well, and I was writing something, I think for my first degree, so it was maybe about 2003, and I went and talked to one of my brothers-in-law, who was a chief pharmacist, an area chief pharmacist. And I was just saying, medical error, what do you do, everything. And he went, the first thing everybody should do, especially when there's been a death, is those people should be able to talk to the chief executive before they talk to anybody else. And he was saying that back in 2003. And again, has it happened? No. But he just kept saying, as long as it's taken seriously by people in authority, everybody calms down a little bit. But if you just kind of keep brushing it under the carpet, it's not going to happen.
My question.
Coffee now, don't they?
Oh, I have one question. Let me just ask that. We still have 5 minutes. We're doing very well, team. I think it's more for Bev, but for anyone, I think there's more than evidence that technology, one model, doesn't fit every patient that we have, every woman, because everyone has different beliefs, different opinions, they have a different background. And I think it was so powerful what you said about the fetal heart, a basic thing that when you are in labor, some women want it in maximum volume and they just like to go with the sound of it. And some people just say, I can't deal with that, can you put it in mute? How interesting such a difference with the technology use. I think my question for you, and I find it also with the risk assessment with the Fit for Labor, some women don't want to know their risk and we have to respect that. How can we standardize and bring our care to a next level if we have so many different opinions, so many women asking for so many different things? How can we do that in our best way?
I have a very simple answer, and it's not very popular in the UK, and that is continuity of midwifery care. So I avoided that term in my presentation because it's a bit of a minefield, especially in this country. But in Australia, continuity of midwifery care, the relationship between a midwife and a woman that starts in early pregnancy, goes through the labour and the birth, and 6 weeks postpartum, is a mandatory requirement in midwifery training. So our students do 20 of those across the 3-year degree, and they are graduated ready to provide relational care, and relational continuity of midwifery care that's recommended by the WHO, by many international organisations, is key to a lot of these problems, including your question about why is it so difficult to support physiological birth and monitor the fetus. Reminded me of an ethnographic study we did, in which we had a group of continuity of care midwives who'd known the women they were caring for throughout pregnancy, and a group of, in a different hospital, a group of midwives who were what we call a fragmented model, running in and out of the room looking after several women at the same time. We measured the amount of time that the midwives stayed with the woman. The continuity of care midwives who knew the women stayed in the room for more than 95% of the time. When they left the room, they said, I'm just going to get X, Y or Z, talk to whoever, I will be back. However, the fragmented care model, midwives were out of the room for up to 70% of the time, and none of them were in the room for more than half the time. So that model of care is extremely important, and what we observed with the continuity of care midwives who were, it was a fetal monitoring project, so they were all monitoring the woman continuously, and what we saw that the midwives' relational care, and there could be other factors to do with this, they could be more skilled, more experienced midwives, but the model of care enabled them to stay with that woman and provide proper, high-quality, attentive, responsive relational care and look after the monitoring. So it is possible, it's happening in Australia, and I'm just so sad that in the UK we are losing that.
Yeah.
And as a result of some of the inquiries that have concluded that continuity of care is not a good investment, despite Jane Sandal's Cochrane Review of 2024 that shows unequivocally how important continuity of midwifery care is to women and to outcomes. Mm.
Hi, I'll be quick. I'm Rabina. I'm a clinical midwife and I work in Brighton. And I just wanted to say, in terms of continuity, I know that's been adopted in a lot of trust around the UK. Unfortunately, not probably the best way it has in Australia, as I am aware of a lot of my colleagues that have moved there, of how things... Sorry, can't you hear me? Is this better? Sorry. I was just saying, I'm a midwife in Brighton, and I work clinically, and continuity of care has been adopted in the UK, but probably not as well as it has just yet in Australia. But... I know certainly within my trust and where I used to work within my previous trust that it's going really, really well, but unfortunately we can't adopt it continuously throughout for all women at the moment. But there is, for example, in my trust, there's one for high-risk women, low-risk women, so there are continuity of care there. But the other point, I've just listened to all three presentations. I feel like they were great presentations. I just want to also add in, as an experienced midwife working clinically, we're seeing more and more women coming that are also giving birth outside of guidance, and that's something important to also consider. And I know it's all about fetal monitoring. I'm a fetal wellbeing midwife myself, but there is more to, in labour case, more than just monitoring that baby. Midwives and doctors, there's so much they have to do, and right now in the NHS there's so much stress for midwives and doctors are under so much pressure. And unfortunately, like your question about, just wanted to go back to your question about why can't you provide care and the monitoring as well, but it's because you can't give that care to women, that support to women, the emotional support to women, is because the midwife is scared that they need to document, the doctor's scared that something else is going to happen. And also when you have to think about litigation as well. It is increasing, social media, everything else, that it's increasing so much, and we don't have the staff to do it. And unfortunately, NHS is probably in maternity, definitely on its knees at the moment, and there's a lot of stress around that, and I do feel like we often forget that. And sometimes women's perception at that time and their partner's perception is a bit different when they go back and reflect, thinking, oh, did I say this? Or this is how they perceived it, and this is why midwives and doctors need to document very carefully of what had happened at that time. But equally, that can be questioned as well, and I think we forget about the both sides. But I think just from experience of having women recently looking after them in labour, where what they've birthed outside of guidance, people just don't want monitoring at all. It's just listening to them, explaining to them, I have to inform you this because we are in the UK, there's certain rules and regulations we need to follow, but it's your body, you know what you want, and I think it's just listening to them and understanding them, and then we go from there, and I think that's what's really, really important, because that's all we can do as well as staff. So yeah, sorry, I just wanted to mention that.
Last comment. I don't know if you attended the International Confederation of Midwives conference in Portugal last week, but the theme was 1 million more midwives. That's how many midwives we need around the world. In the UK, my understanding is that the NHS is not funding enough midwives to resource high quality care. We have the opposite problem in Australia where midwives we can't educate enough midwives because the hospitals won't give us enough clinical placements to train them. So we're both under different pressures. Also in Australia, if a woman wants care outside the guidelines, the midwife will risk her registration by looking after her, which is quite different from the UK. So a midwife in Australia looking after a woman at home, for example, there's some big complication that requires transfer to hospital and the woman refuses, the midwife is risking her registration by staying with her. In the UK, she has a duty of care to stay with her. So different pressures there, but totally understand the systemic issues around that. And women who decline guidelines are sometimes responding to the evidence, which is not aligned with the guidelines. So that's another thing we need to remember. Thank you.